Hey TechKnowStuds! In my last video, I covered the different types of NAT, being static or dynamic, being NAT or PAT. In my next few videos, I'm actually going to demo each one of those and give some examples of how we would implement it. However, what I want to do is I want to show you the big picture of what this command looks like. Or there's a few different commands that you would enter, but we're going to take a look at the main command that sets up NAT on your device. And we're going to see what the differences is in the different ways we want to implement it. So that's what this video is all about, is the command, the IPNAT statement that you would enter in on your router. In actuality, the number of commands that you have to enter on your router is going to be dependent on the type of NAT that you're implementing. I'm not going to be covering all of the commands in this. Basically, I'm going to be covering what is the IPNAT. But in the case of where I'm implementing static NAT, I'm not only going to have to implement this IPNAT statement, but I'm going to have to go to this interface right here and say that this is the outside interface. And I'm going to have to go onto this interface right here and label this as being the inside interface. I'm not going to cover what those commands are, but what I will be covering is the difference in this IPNAT between the different NAT types. So in this case right here, I'm covering the static NAT. In the static NAT, I'm going to do an IPNAT inside source, and then I'm going to specify that this is static. I will put the local IP address, that is the IP address that's going to be found on the inside local. So maybe it's some web server that's over here. And so whatever IP address I've got assigned on that IP, on that web server, is going to be put in right here. And the next thing I need to do is assign the global IP address. That is going to be the address that's the rest of the world is going to see for that web server. If we're doing static PAT, it really is quite similar. Both of the entries start out with this IPNAT inside source static. And then they both have the local IP address, so we can see that this is similar between the two, and they both have a global IP address. So the only thing that's different between these two is we include this TCP right here and these ports, both the local and global ports that are going to be associated with it. So that is a static PAT. When it comes to dynamic NAT, we're going to see a little different commands here. So we still see on a dynamic NAT, we see IPNAT inside source, but instead we specify a list and a pool. So the list is going to be representative of our local addresses, all of the addresses that are on the inside that we want translated. So rather than specifying the specific local address that we have, we're going to say all of these that, and as an example in our network right here that we've been creating, maybe it's going to represent all of the 10.0.0. We would define this using an access control list. So maybe I create an access control list 1, and that access control list 1 is going to be where that number goes, the number right there. So then we also have to define the pool. The pool is going to be what is going to be the global addresses it's going to take from. So what addresses, as it goes out this interface, what addresses it's going to be translated to. And then there's a separate pool command that we would actually define a pool name with the addresses assigned to that pool that can be translated to the outside world. It's going to be a public address. Then we have a dynamic PAT. And the dynamic PAT specifically, we're going to go over one with a pool because there's several different scenarios that we can go with this. So the only difference with this dynamic PAT with a pool, you can see that we've got it set up the same way, except for we include this word overload on the end of this. What it just means is now we can use port numbers with it. So no longer do we have to just stick with a single IP address, but we can use port numbers as well. For this reason, this dynamic PAT that we've been talking about often is referred to as NAT overload. because the command to set this up is really the same as NAT, except for it has this overload at the end of it. There are times when we really only have one IP that we're working with, and that IP address is assigned to the interface itself. Your home networks are a great example to this. Most of ISPs are just going to assign you one IP address unless you've purchased more. And that IP address is going to be what all the translation is going to do, but it's also going to be the interface on that router. So this interface right here becomes whatever IP address is assigned to there becomes the port address translation IP address as well. So we're defining the interface. So this is PAT using a specific interface. And we replace that pool and then PAT pool name with the interface and then the interface ID. So that is the change there. So this is dynamic PAT using a single interface rather than using a pool. So in summary, here are the NAT commands that we're going to be using in the next few videos. They all have this IPNAT inside source. So the static ones specify that they are static. They have both a local IP address that you specify and a global IP address that you specify. The only difference is if we're doing the ports, the port address translation, we include the TCP and the port numbers there. If we're doing dynamic, then what we do is we include what is the list of addresses that we're going to translate. We do that by pointing this to an ACL number. And the ACL is where we're going to specify what are the inside addresses going to look like, what are the local addresses going to look like. And then we have the pools that we create. We create these pools as the IP addresses that will be selected that are going to be translated to. So that's in place of instead of specifying the global IP address, we're specifying a whole pool there. The only difference with the port address translation is we include this overload, which means that it can use one of those IP addresses multiple times with multiple port numbers. All right, then finally we've got this PAT using a interface. So we include this interface if we want to just include the IP address of the interface that it's exiting.